The Future of Money, Governance, and the Law is hosted by the Government Blockchain Association, a worldwide community to connect, communicate, and collaborate. This show is produced by Podtex. To learn more and how to host your own show, go to www.podtex.com. Podtechs. Podtex, your partners in podcasting.
Hi, this is Gerard Daché. I'm the Executive Director of the Government Blockchain Association. And today we've got Amelia Powers Gardner with us. Amelia she's a county clerk auditor for Utah County. And I had the incredible pleasure of meeting her just the other evening when she spoke at our event in Washington, D.C. So Amelia, we are thrilled to have you with us. And welcome to the Future of Money, Governance, and the Law.
Thank you, Gerard. I'm excited to be here, and I'm happy to have this discussion with you.
Excellent. Well, listen, we talked about some of the questions that we asked. We're going to grill you mercilessly on this podcast. So let's start off with tell us a little bit about your story. Actually, for the audience's perspective, Amelia has implemented a blockchain voting solution in Utah County, one of only 4 jurisdictions, I guess, in the country. And so, Amelia, tell us a little bit about your story and how you got into this whole blockchain thing.
My story is probably a little bit different than most people. I actually got started in blockchain because my husband, Tobin Gardner, loved the idea of blockchain, self-sovereign identity, cryptocurrency that didn't have a central bank. And so early on in our relationship, when it was his turn to pick a movie for date night, he would pick blockchain documentaries. So I actually got interested in blockchain and learned about blockchain watching blockchain technology documentaries on date night with my husband.
Amelia, and you married this man?
I did. See, luckily for him, I'm actually a big nerd at heart. I'm an engineer by training. I love technical things, which is why clerk auditor interested me, right? Nobody grows up and says, I'm going to be clerk auditor when I grow up. So I'm a nerd, and that worked out well for my husband.
That's funny. What kind of movies would you pick on date night?
I like action and adventure movies, actually. I'm a big fan of Marvel and Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, and still nerdy, but action-oriented nerdy things.
Which is a great segue that we'll get into a little later about implementing voting on the blockchain. So that's going to be perfect. You'll get to live out those movie fantasies.
Yes.
Well, so you guys would watch some blockchain documentaries, and what were you doing at the time, and then how did that move forward from there?
So at the time, I was a business operations consultant. I worked with small businesses, and my goal was to make small businesses more efficient so that they could get more profit out of whatever they were doing. The more efficient they were, the higher their profit margin was. And anyone who's an entrepreneur or in small business knows that profit margins tend to be very slim. So I tried to find passionate people and help them make the most of what they had. At the time, blockchain was really just an interesting technology and an interesting concept to me. It wasn't until I, in a moment of weakness, agreed to run for public office that I began to see that all of those nights of blockchain documentaries were going to come in handy.
So what motivated you to run for public office? Because I've interviewed some other folks that have run for office, and it was interesting the juxtaposition of what they saw happening and how they saw blockchain coming to it. So what was it that motivated you?
So what first motivated me to run for office was kind of like, I'd like to compare my office previous to me taking office as Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. Over the course of several years, the elections office in Utah County had a series of unfortunate events. And it really culminated in 2018 when the governor dubbed my office prior to me taking office, the epicenter of dysfunction in the state of Utah.
Wow, that is quite that's quite a title.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, really, you could not have put a stronger target on it, the epicenter of dysfunction. And I was a political activist at the time. I volunteered for campaigns. I dabbled a little bit in campaign management for local office, and I was very passionate about initiatives and government involvement. But it wasn't my career. And I actually set out on a mission to recruit someone to run against the current county clerk auditor. And to no avail. I spent several months, and literally the night before the filing deadline, we had no one who was running. And I looked at my family and said, I think I need to run. I think it's going to have to be me. No one else is doing this. So on the day of the filing deadline, I filed for office 2 hours before the filing deadline and jumped in and said, if someone has to do it, it might as well be me.
Wow. And so, where was it that blockchain then started to come into it? I mean, clearly you saw some problems. You've been watching these documentaries. When did you start connecting the dots?
So it wasn't until I actually took office. I was sworn in January of this year. And in the election world, when a new clerk comes in, pretty much every vendor in elections starts to contact that new clerk and say, hey, use our service, use our service. And with us having received national press and state press as the epicenter of dysfunction, pretty much every elections vendor out there was showing up to show me their new solutions and on how I could fix and turn around this office. One of those vendors was the mobile voting app Votes. That's VOATZ. The CEO of Votes, Nimit, actually came into town and met with me and showed me a solution for our overseas and military voters that could make the process more efficient. It was at that point that I kind of actually put him on the back burner and said, I have to fix domestic elections first. Once we had corrected all of the problems so that we could have safe, secure, true elections that our citizens could have confidence in, then I said, okay, well, let's look at correcting any issues with our overseas population. And when we looked at the solution, the votes option utilizing blockchain technology was just such a solid, good option that we started to pursue that path.
And so, how do you compare the using a blockchain solution with overseas constituents compared to the way you did used to do it in the past compared to how Votes does it? What's the big difference?
Yeah. So the overseas constituents had several options. They had 3 options for voting. They could vote with snail mail. Problem with that is snail mail, when you get outside the borders of the United States, is even more unreliable than people tease the US Postal Service for being. If you look globally, we actually have a pretty solid postal service as far as a government entity. Outside of our borders, we really lose control of it. Because of that, there needs to be other options, and those other options were fax machine and email. So I don't know many people who actually use fax machines to this day. So the vast majority of our overseas voters were using email, unsecured Gmail, Yahoo, Outlook, just their regular hacked every day on every continent email.
Um, so, uh, so Votes came to you. Now, I'm sure there were a lot of other vendors, right?
Yeah.
Uh, was it? I mean, I can't imagine somebody in your position having to deal with all these vendors. What was it about the Votes solution that said these are the folks that I got to work with?
So all of the other internet voting solutions that we could use overseas, every one of them used just a regular internet portal. And they were using the cloud or an internet portal that basically gave us uh, a lack of security in that even though they were encrypted, if they were hacked, they would only need to hack one location. Because of my knowledge on blockchain, I recognized that utilizing blockchain technology, what Votes has done is they've added an extra level of security. All of the other options had levels of encryption and security. So did Votes. The difference was everybody else's solution stored all the information on a server, and Votes stored that information on the blockchain. And it is a privately held blockchain, but it had 32 nodes. So that told me everyone else, you'd have to hack one server. Votes, you need to hack at least 17 simultaneously. That was a significantly higher level of confidence that I could have in their solution. I think the other thing that was different about them
Right.
is that they had identity verification software embedded into the process, meaning that we could actually verify the person casting this vote was the person who has a right to vote. This was the only solution that did that.
Gotcha. And then you use the term the blockchain. So a lot of the folks listening to this podcast may not really understand when people say the blockchain. They may think that there's only one blockchain. Do you want to sort of describe a little bit about the Votes blockchain and how it compares to maybe other types of blockchains that are out there?
Yeah, so there's a difference between like an open source blockchain like Bitcoin uses or a privately held blockchain like Votes uses. A publicly sourced blockchain has as many nodes or storage locations as users. So, for example, Bitcoin or Ethereum have thousands or tens of thousands of nodes, whereas a privately held blockchain uses nodes as their storage devices. It's just as many as they utilize. Now, Votes actually doesn't house all of their nodes themselves. They utilize two companies. They have them split evenly, so 16 with one company, 16 with another, and each one of those 16 servers is between four different locations for each of the companies, giving us a lot of variability and a lot of backup security so that you couldn't just hack one computer. You would need to hack 17 in their case, or in the case of Bitcoin or Ethereum, you would need to hack tens or hundreds of thousands.
So with the Vote solution, if these two companies conspired to change the vote, would those two companies be able to do that?
No, because there would be a record of that. That's the beauty of blockchain. Anytime something in the record changes, there is a almost like a trail or a trace of that record. So if these two companies conspired to change something, they would have to change them all simultaneously, and there would be a record of them doing that.
Got it. And then those records are available to the public?
Yes. So we open our record up to the public. In fact, for the auditing purposes, anybody can go in and see all of the records, and they're available to anyone. The other thing that I loved about utilizing a blockchain solution is we can use cryptography to separate and really retain a secret ballot. We can separate voter information from the cast record and allow that voter to have their constitutional right of a secret ballot preserved. This was the only method that allowed us to do that, utilizing cryptography and a voter ID.
Let me come back to because when you spoke the other night, I was really impressed with sort of the auditing and how you used third parties to even add an extra layer of integrity to it. But let me sideline for a second over to I'm sure when you came up with this idea, hey guys, I got this great idea. Let's do this voting on the blockchain. I'm sure people put their arms around you and said, "Amelia, that's a great idea. Let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and do this together." Right? What was uh, what was it like to sort of bring a new kind of technology into that environment, and what are some of the ways that you dealt with that?
Anytime you bring anything new into the voting environment, you need to be prepared to lose every one of your friends in the industry. It is it creates a very hostile environment. As you can imagine, elections administrators do not embrace change, even if that change brings in additional security. In fact, every major change that has happened in the voting industry domestically here in the country has happened as a result of federal law change. So that really means that the U.S. Congress passes a law and forces all of the election administrators in the country to comply. That's really the only way change typically happens in voting here in the US.
Yeah. So how'd you deal with that? Right. You lost all your friends. But you still were able to get it done. So what was your
Yeah, well,
strategy?
luckily for me, I was so new. I've only been in office 10 months right now. So I really actually didn't have many friends in the industry, so it was okay for me that I lost them. Uh, Really, I think the most courageous person on my team is my fantastic elections director, Roseanne Mitchell. Roseanne has over 20 years experience in elections. She started her elections career in the Utah Lieutenant Governor's office and was there for several years, and then went to a neighboring county to the north, Salt Lake County, and she worked in their elections division for several years before I hired her as my elections director. And Roseanne was really the courageous one, because originally we would come to her and say, I want to implement this technology. And like any good election official, she comes to everything skeptical, as she should. And really, she was pivotal in telling us every potential problem and every potential error that we could come up against. And that actually enabled my chief deputy, Josh Daniels, and I to go through and troubleshoot these and say, okay, what issues could we have? What issues could that cause us? And how do we proactively ensure that these things don't happen? She did a great job of explaining to us the trepidation that others were going to have, what causes that trepidation, and how we can work with them. Across the board, our vendors were phenomenal. Our main vendor that we use for tabulation equipment in our county is called ES&S. And the ES&S team was absolutely phenomenal. They worked with votes to ensure that our ballots, when they printed, could run through the software tabulation. Roseanne was able to help guide us through this process as our almost like our paid guide as we climbed Mount Everest. She went with us and guided us through this process. Um, like I said, ES&S was phenomenal in making sure that it would be seamless. Votes, the actual app software, were they were in our office on a regular basis. We had a weekly phone call with them to make sure it was going to work. And we really had a whole team that came together, came to the table, and made sure that every concern and every problem that anyone thought of, we had a backup plan for and we addressed it. That's why this was successful. I know one of the questions you asked was, what problems did you have implementing this? That really
Can
was the major problem, is we had to foresee every possible issue and a solution for it before it happened.
so a lot of people may be asking, well, what exactly does it mean to vote on the blockchain? Can you just sort of walk through the process of what voting on the blockchain means?
Yeah, absolutely. So we believe in paper ballots in our county. And so the person is actually not casting their vote and having it get counted for the official election on the blockchain. What's happening is a record of their vote is being recorded in the blockchain. So a military overseas or a disabled voter in our case we identify that they are eligible to utilize the Votes app to cast their ballot. What happens is they download the app onto their smart device, and we tell votes that they're eligible. They use a government issued ID, something like a driver's license, a military ID, or a passport. They scan that in using the camera on their device. They take a selfie video of themselves using the device, and we compare their government issued ID with the photo recognition. And we're looking at facial recognition technology to ensure that they are who they say they are. Once we verify they are who they say they are, then they have access to their ballot. They go through, they make their selections on their ballot, and they cast their ballot. When they cast that ballot, their vote goes into a virtual lockbox until election day. On election day, we open that lockbox and their vote is recorded in the blockchain. It's basically a record that says this anonymous user cast this vote. Now they know which anonymous user they are because they receive an email when they cast their ballot that says this is your anonymous user ID and this is how you cast your ballot. At that point, they can go onto the blockchain and they can verify that the receipt they received casting their ballot matches how it was actually recorded in the blockchain. What we do at the county offices at that point is once we open that lockbox, Votes has a software that prints off ballots for us based off those blockchain records. And those ballots are printed out just like all of the other paper ballots we have in the county. Those paper ballots then go on our tabulating scanners with every other ballot. Every ballot we've received in the mail, every ballot that was cast at a polling location on election day, we scan those ballots with all of the others. And then we count those votes. The auditing of it is the interesting part. We have contracted with the National Cybersecurity Center. After the election takes place, they come in and they're checking the blockchain record. They're checking the software that generates the paper ballot to ensure that the paper ballot and the blockchain record match. They also check the software to ensure that the receipt that was sent to the voter, the email receipt sent to the voter, we want to make sure that that receipt generated, the software that generates that receipt, also matches the blockchain. So we're basically checking all of the systems that Votes has in place against the blockchain.
Wow. So the key here is it's still a paper ballot. So you're not really threatening the existing kind of legal regulatory framework. What you're basically doing is instead of them sending it via email, they're now sending it through another more secure system that gives you an unalterable record so that it can be verified. So it's still printed out and goes into the regular system. So you've really integrated a whole new technique and paradigm within an existing structure. Is that right?
Yeah. So we actually call it a mobile ballot marking system. So you're marking your paper ballot with a mobile device is really what you're doing.
When we were together the other evening at our event in DC, you talked a little bit about messaging, right, and how you had to overcome because it's not always about the technology, right? When trying to implement a blockchain solution, there's people involved, and sometimes it's kind of like they have a mind of their own, right? So, talk to us a little bit about messaging and some of your strategies on that.
Yeah, I think the most important thing for people to realize is that we're not taking over the election with mobile phones. A lot of people are afraid that anybody with a mobile phone is going to be able to come in and vote in our election whether or not they're eligible. One of the most important things in messaging is helping people to understand that the technology that we're implementing is implemented for a certain demographic, and that demographic is currently using email to vote. So what we're doing is introducing a significantly more secure method of voting to a specific demographic who's using a less secure system currently.
Right. So, we had talked about overseas folks, and you also said something about special needs or the elderly, right?
Yeah. In my state, Any method of voting that is approved for overseas voters can also be approved for the disabled population. So we're the first jurisdiction in the country to utilize mobile voting for the disabled population. But once our first pilot in our municipal primary in August, we piloted the votes and the mobile voting for our overseas population. It went so well that I decided to expand it for our domestic disabled population as well, allowing those citizens that are eligible to vote that are here but maybe have mobility issues or eyesight issues. They can utilize their device that is tailored to them and that they know to cast their ballot.
Right. What's your thoughts in terms of whether this technology uh, can can be used with standard? So we have these voting machines. Maintaining an audit or a record of the vote on the blockchain, much like you do with the mobile voting.
I'm not sure I understood that question.
Well, so the way it works now is when somebody goes into a polling place and they vote, right? There's a paper vote, and that ballot essentially then gets scanned in or gets recorded. Do you think at some point that it would make sense, or if there's any value or benefit to when that happens for essentially a record of that vote to be maintained on the blockchain and hashed and secured in the same way that you're doing it with overseas population?
Yeah, I could see value in that. Right now, federal law requires that we keep any election material for 22 months. So the way it works now, when we scan our ballots so we can tabulate them, we are generating a digital image as we tabulate. All of the paper ballots then get put in boxes, a zip tie goes on them, and they go into our secure warehouse for 22 months and then are shredded after that. But we utilize the digital copy for what's called adjudication. We're checking those digital copies if somebody had a write-in candidate or if maybe they didn't mark their choice clearly enough and the scanner couldn't pick it up because they didn't press hard enough with the pen or whatever the case is. We actually do what's called adjudication and we check all of those ballots digitally on the computer. I could see value in having a digital backup of that. You never know in this day and age if an arson fire were to burn down our warehouse and we lost all the paper copies. It would be fantastic to have those digital copies in the blockchain.
Right. Absolutely. Now, shortly after the vote that you guys did, you guys were in the news, right? So you showed a little news clip, and you said that news clip was kind of instrumental in how you were getting support and maintaining support. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So when we agreed to utilize this mobile voting app and this blockchain voting for the disabled population, one of the challenges we found is that we knew that this could be valuable to a lot of disabled people. But when you register to vote, if you're outside the country and you need a what's called a UCAVA voter, Uniformed and Overseas Citizens ballot, there's a box that you check. I'm a UCAVA voter. And then we send you a form and you fill out that UCAVA form. Those people, we had a way to contact them. We could email them and say, hey, you're eligible to vote using a mobile app. Would you prefer to do that? There isn't something similar for disabled people. When they register to vote, we don't say, are you disabled? So we had no way to contact the disability community and let them know. So we sent out over social media announcements to say, hey, does anybody have any friends or family or neighbors that are disabled or homebound for medical reasons that you think could benefit from being able to vote on a mobile device? Reach out to us and let us know. At that point, I was contacted, and I actually grew up a block and a half from this lady. Her name is Maxine Grimet, and she is just a fantastic lady who happens to be 106 years old. So I get a call, and they said, hey, Maxine broke her ankle about a year ago and she can't walk anymore. She's in a wheelchair and can't leave her house without significant assistance. Maybe Maxine would want to. I replied and said, Maxine, as in the Maxine that I grew up down the road from that was like really, really old when I was growing up. That Maxine? And they said, the very one. I said, how old is she? And they said, 106 years old. So I said, do you have any way I can contact her? And they said, well, she doesn't have a cell phone, but her daughter does. This is her daughter's number. We called up her daughter, who's in at least her 70s, and said, her name is Dixie. I called up Dixie and said, hey, Dixie, does your mom want the ballot to come to her? Do you think she would be interested in voting in this election? We looked up, her voter record was active, meaning that she is still to this day an active voter. She said, absolutely. And the local news called us and said, hey, we heard wind of your pilot, your blockchain voting pilot. Do you have any footage that we could get? I said, well, we're actually going to bring an iPad to a 106-year-old lady so that she can vote. What do you think? Would you like to come along? They were so excited. Well, we showed up on election day and it worked fantastic. I was afraid that maybe she wouldn't understand the process, that maybe it would be difficult. And we decided to just do it live on television with the news camera there. And it was so smooth. We showed up, we showed her the iPad. She
Wow.
was able to increase the font if she needed to be able to see. She was able to read the instructions and cast her ballot. And as she was sitting there casting her ballot, it occurred to me 2020 is the 100th year anniversary of the 19th Amendment, where women were given the right to vote. And she's
Wow.
106, which means that she was born before women had the right to vote. And here we are 100 years later, and we can bring the ballot to this lady so that she can cast her vote. That was very eye-opening, and I mean, it sent chills down the spines of everybody in the room as we talked to her about her remembering when her mom was given the right to vote.
Wow. So if we have anybody listening to this podcast from the media, boy, this is a great national story, right? Especially coming up to the 2020 election. That's just fantastic. Wow. Listen, I was so impressed in just hear you talking about sort of your journey through things and the challenges, and let's from there let's move into the messaging, right? Because you said that one of the questions that was asked during an event was sometimes when election officials leave, a lot of the changes that they implement don't survive. And so you talked a little bit about how you were trying to lock in the benefits and the advantages so that it would be difficult for them to be undone. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am not a career politician. We talked about earlier that I really decided to run at the last moment and left a very profitable career to become a county clerk auditor. I do not intend on spending the next 20 years as the county clerk. One of the things that I worry about as a citizen of this county is that any of the efficiencies and the technology that I implement could just be thrown away with the next administration. But I'm also a fairly good marketer. I mean, I was a small business consultant, so I understand the concept of bringing your products to market. And one of the things that's very important is that people recognize that the community that we're serving with this technology right now, these are our military and overseas citizens and the disabled community. We are giving those that fight and put their lives on the line for our freedom, we are giving them the ability to make sure that their vote counts. And if we take that away from them because we're afraid of technology, that is not a good message for someone who wants to come in after me and is maybe afraid of this technology. Maxine and her story is a great example of that. Can you imagine a new person coming into office and Maxine is used to being able to vote like this, and then all of a sudden that opportunity is taken away because someone is afraid of technology? Maxine has, I think she said 87 grandchildren and great grandchildren, and then 2 great great grandchildren. Her posterity will raise up if their grandma, who was born before women had the right to vote, if she loses the right to vote in a way that is easy for her. She can't hardly hold a pen to fill out a paper ballot, but she can push the screen on an iPad. She can't read the print on a small paper ballot, but she can increase the size and the font on an iPad. If the person coming after me takes away Maxine's right to vote because they're afraid of technology, that's not a story they want to tell. One of the most important things in government when implementing this technology is highlighting the service that you are providing for a disenfranchised population, especially a population like Maxine or our military personnel who we have a right, they have a right to vote, and we have an obligation to bring it to them.
Yeah. So you've learned a lot here in this short amount of time. I want to ask about two things, right? The first one is how'd you find out about GBA and the Government Blockchain Association and that kind of connection? And then the second part is how are you going to leverage these lessons learned and sharing that with other people? You've got an event coming up. We've got an event coming up. So tell us a little bit about how you found out about GBA, and then what your thought process are in terms of sharing this information, either at your event or our event or both.
Yeah, great question. So I realized very, very soon in my tenure here, my 10 months or almost 11 months that I've been in elected office, that when I would have new ideas or I would have people come to me, I would call my peers, county clerks in other counties, and ask their advice because most of them have at least a decade, if not 2, of experience, and I have all of a several months. So I would call them and say, "Hey, you guys know this better than me. What are your thoughts on XYZ?" And without fail, almost every time the answer would be, "Well, that vendor's really nice, but they don't actually work in government, so they don't really quite understand what we deal with." This is a very common concept with government. People in government think that if you aren't actually implementing something in government yourself, that you don't understand what they're up against. And so I've decided that the more I can share my successes implementing technology, whether it be blockchain technology or other technology, the more I can share it as an elected official, as a government official who's currently utilizing these efficiencies and technologies, the more people will listen because they're not going to listen to the consultants in the industry unless they've been in their shoes. I decided that I wanted to host an event that was government officials that are currently utilizing blockchain technology for various things, speaking to government officials who are curious about blockchain technology, but don't know how to implement it or aren't sure it will work. I called it Government in Blockchain, and I was able to secure a few sponsors for the event so that it's free for those in the government sector. As I was putting this event together, I decided to go on to LinkedIn and just search the hashtag blockchain. I went on to LinkedIn, searched the hashtag blockchain, and found the Government Blockchain Association. I was so thrilled to be able to find that there is an association out there that is facilitating government officials like myself sharing and spreading the message and the knowledge that we have of blockchain. That's how I discovered GBA.
You know, it kind of warms my heart because I heard from somebody who's working on down in South America. I think Guatemala, El Salvador. I can't remember where, but they're dealing with some some corruption issues in their voting system, and they've been fighting and working, and when he contacted me, he said, "I was so relieved that I don't feel like I'm alone anymore." Right, and we've got this global network of professionals that have a passion for blockchain and government, and we're becoming somewhat of a family, right? It's a group of people that can connect, communicate, and collaborate. And so to hear you say that just really warms my heart that this vision is actually taking root. So that's awesome. So tell them a little bit. You got an event on December 18th, right? I think it's 2 o'clock there in Utah. Tell them a little bit about that. And I know that we have it listed on the site gbaglobal.org. If you go under the events tab, you'll see it. But tell them a little bit about that event.
Yeah, our event is December 18th from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. It's 3 hours that will consist of a very short blockchain 101 for those that don't really understand blockchain. A lot of the government officials that are going to be in attendance aren't really blockchain experts. They've just heard the term. So we'll do a quick overview, about 10 minutes, on what is blockchain and why it matters. The bulk of the time will be spent. I will be one of the speakers. We're looking to find a county recorder who's using blockchain technology to record land. We've got I'm actually not going to be talking about voting. I'm going to be talking about licensing and marriage licenses and marriage certificates. I'm also utilizing blockchain technology for that. We've got a person from the West Virginia Secretary of State's office. They currently utilize blockchain voting, so they're going to cover the voting aspect of it. I'll cover the marriage license aspect of it. We've got a county recorder. We've got a state legislator from another state who's going to come in and talk about the different bills that they've passed and how state legislatures can help facilitate the use of blockchain technology at the local government level. And we're also bringing in a cybersecurity expert from the National Cybersecurity Center to talk about how blockchain can increase the cybersecurity for local government. We're focusing most of this on local government, meaning cities, municipalities, and counties. It's all government folks or people with expertise in government, and our target audience are government officials and citizens who are heavily involved or interested in their local governments utilizing the technology.
So, Amelia, I know you're a relatively new member of the GBA. Have you had an opportunity to go into the working groups, and specifically the land titling, cybersecurity, or any of those working groups?
I haven't looked much at the land titling. That's typically under the recorder's office, and I've been focusing so much on the areas that I cover. But I've looked into the voting one. But I look forward into looking into some of the other groups.
Yeah, there's about 50 working groups. Land titling is one of them. I think we have one on licensing and permits, and so the great thing about these working groups is anybody in government can join GBA for free. They can join these working groups, and then they're instantly connected with private sector and public sector professionals that have an expertise and a passion for this. So yeah, that's something I would encourage you to do. John Dean Markunis runs the land titling work groups out in New York, and he travels all over the world, basically advising people on the use of blockchain and land titling. And there's all kinds of just really phenomenal people in that group. And then we've got an event on January 31st in the U.S. Oh, one more thing before we get off your December 18th event. Will you be broadcasting that? Because we would love to, if you're gonna broadcast it on like YouTube or something, we'd love to help you promote that.
Yeah. We are finalizing the details right now, but our plan is to broadcast it and to archive it.
Okay. All right. So if somebody Googles if they go to gbaglobal.org and under the search bar type in the word voting, we'll put a blog post in there so anybody can get whatever information, what your website's going to be and all that stuff. I know you have an Eventbrite page listed in there, so we'll make sure that we connect everybody to it. We'll put it in the show notes as well. That'll be
That'd
awesome.
be great.
Yeah, excellent. And let's see, parting question: what advice do you have for other folks? Because we're going to promote this podcast to other elections officials around the country, potentially around the world. What advice would you have for them if they sort of step into a situation like you have and want to bring some, maybe have some dysfunction, maybe not the epicenter, maybe just an orbit of dysfunction. But what advice would you give them?
The advice that I would give to someone who, especially in the voting space, is dealing with maybe some dysfunction is don't try to do this on your own and don't try to reinvent the wheel. There are experts out there who are willing to help you and guide you along the way, and start one piece at a time. When we implemented the blockchain voting, it was for a small group of people, and it solved a real problem that we had in the county to make this portion of voting more efficient and more transparent. Reach out to me, reach out to other counties that you see that are doing this well, or other municipalities, and really just start one step at a time and solve one problem at a time.
So if they wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to be able to connect with you?
The best way to connect with me is through email, and my email is pretty easy. It's ameliap@utahcounty.gov.
Perfect. And then if anybody else wants any additional resources on blockchain and voting, if you go to gbaglobal.org, under the search bar, just type in the word voting. We also have a directory of voting solutions. So Amelia mentioned the one that she used, and there are others. So by all means, feel free to check them out. They're all great. They're all great companies. And Amelia, thank you so much. Do me a favor. I'm going to end the podcast here in just a minute. I need you to stay on just to make sure that all the files upload and everything.
Yeah,
and
we're hoping.
Hopefully we'll see you on the 31st.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
We shine the spotlight on our community. Please take a few minutes and listen to one of our global members.
I am Jason Lee, so I am an assistant professor of finance at the George Mason University School of Business. So I teach students blockchain, and also I do research on blockchain. So for me, I think one of the pressing issue in the blockchain space, and for blockchain to really make a difference to the world, is about educating people about all the new technology, all the changes that is happening. Like even for me, when I'm doing research in this area, just to catching up with the frontier is a pressing task, let alone like other people who have their own daily responsibilities. So I give GBA a lot of credit and kudos for just bringing this educational experience and bringing people together so that people can learn from each other. Just bring that experience to people, I think, is a great service that is the GBA is doing to not only its members, but just the general community at large.
The Future of Money Governance and the Law is brought to you by the Government Blockchain Association, or GBA. The podcast brings together leaders in the public and private sector to discuss how government and industry can work together. We talk about how to enhance the integrity of our institutions and the quality of life for the people they serve.